and then we will have revenue forecast and snow days and other presentations. Usually by the time you get your binder, we have what's called the ED 279. That's the document that connotes to the Auburn School Department from the state of Maine how much general purpose aid we think we're going to get. It's an estimate. At the end of the process, then that's the legislative process, we get what's called an enacted version, but the preliminary and the enacted are pretty close to each other. So moving along, then we have April 3rd, which is a public hearing. That's a practice that the committee has felt strongly to maintain. On the 24th, and we'll have, some of these are to be determined, there will be a joint council and school committee budget workshop, again, for transparency and dialogue. Then in May, usually your very first meeting, we ask you to approve the budget. It goes to the council, and then sometime during that month, the council will approve the budget, and then it'll go to what I call the BVR, or the budget validation referendum. And that, in a nutshell, is the process. And I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. At any point in this process, Mark and I have 3 budgets open. We have the one that we're in, so fiscal year 23, the one that we're preparing, which is fiscal year 25, and the one that we just finished, for example, the audit report that will go to the council and the school committee on the 20th. So we're working with 3 budgets, it doesn't really get confusing for us, but it's just important to remember what year you're actually working on. So some of the things that we want to touch on tonight include estimated increases with negotiated agreements. And so our teacher unit is the largest one. And so we are estimating about $841,253 for the increase with that unit. So that's a settled contract. We have a settled contract with the Principals Association. You may recall earlier, I think it was October, whereas Mike, was it October when that was settled? We have a 3-year agreement with them, and year 1 is $136,000 ballpark for that increase. And then these are negotiated agreements that will need to be finished. We have the ed techs and salaries. Mark has included what the budget is for the current 24 school year. And right now we're negotiating with drivers and bus aides, and we'll see where that unit ends up in terms of cost. So one of the big drivers that we have to make our best guess at is health insurance. And Mark and I tend to be pretty conservative when it comes to estimating health insurance costs, because it is a lot easier, in my experience, to take it out as opposed to having to go find it and put it back in. So last year, Mark and I started with 15%. This year, we're going to start with 12%. You can see what the numbers look like. Health insurance is a significant amount of money for the Auburn School Department, currently just under $6 million. And with a 12% increase for fiscal year 24, we'll be over $6 million, closer to $6 million, almost $7 million. And again, this is for the general fund only. We have a number of positions and grants such as Title I, Title II, and this is only the general fund. You folks deal with the general fund. So their projected costs, the actual increase comes to us usually in April. Right about now, Mark and I get some usage data, and we again try to apply that to our best guess scenario and figure out what our mod may be. So we're going to talk about revenue and projections, and I think, Mark, this is where you come in.
Thank you. So there were a couple of areas of focus for our revenue conversation. First and foremost is our state subsidy for operations. There are 2 factors that tend to drive your state subsidy. One is your student enrollment, and we've seen a decline in student enrollment over time. In fact, if we look at the numbers they're likely to use in our ED 279 that Dr. Brown referred to earlier, we'll see a reduction of about 45 students, which is about 1.4%. The other factor that drives state subsidy, and it's been a more significant factor for Auburn, is your state valuation of property, because they determine the cost of an adequate education through your enrollment. Then they subtract out what they think each community can pay for locally, and that the state subsidy is the difference. our state valuation has been increasing higher than the state average, and that's been true of many southern Maine communities. So if your state valuation of property is increasing higher than the state average, that's going to reduce your subsidy as well as enrollment decline. So we can anticipate some decline in state subsidy. We just don't know yet what that might look like. The second item is more an item for discussion than concern, and that's looking at how we use our fund balance funds as revenue within the budget for the coming year. We anticipate, as we look at last year's year end, we had a surplus. We anticipate our fund balance will continue to grow. At the same time, we've increased the use of our fund balance as a part of our revenue stream. So in the current year's budget, we're using $2 million in our fund balance for current revenue. We've cautioned before, you have to be careful about that, where you either feather it up or feather it down from year to year, because if you use all of your fund balance funds in one year and you don't have them the next year, then you've created a revenue cliff where all of a sudden you don't have those. So one of the things we'll do is produce a 3-year look forward to create some potential options for how you might think about increasing and decreasing revenue over time so you can avoid that funding cliff. So we've talked about debt service a lot because we've had a real impact from the high school. So you've seen portions of the slide before. This refers only to the local share of state-approved debt service. So for the high school, the state's paying for 88% of the debt service. We're paying for about 12% with local tax funds, and they match your revenue payments to their state subsidy each year. So if we think about the high school, we've now fully built into the base budget the principal and interest payments for the 2 bonds for the high school, along with Park Avenue, of course. The third bond, which we've just has gone out and for this fall, was the bond to pay for the costs of PCB abatement at the high school. That is fully state supported. So in other words, the revenue coming in on that from the state subsidy will match whatever the debt service is. So this is looking only at the impact on the local share. We've noted before that bonds, municipal bonds, are a little bit different from your home mortgage. The interest rates tend to decline from year to year because it's typically based on the remaining balance. And so if we look at last year to this year, there was an increase of $293,000. Moving forward, the good news is we'll see a small decrease from year to year. In fact, in fiscal year 27, we'll see an even larger decrease as a result of Park Avenue being fully paid off. So next year, we would expect a decrease of just under $32,000. I would note here, under your change from the prior year, we also have our capital improvement bonds. We have 12 of those, either capital improvement bonds we take out in conjunction with the city each year, or our revolving renovation fund bonds. And you see the same decrease in interest rates in those. You also, each year, you're going to drop out one of those bonds because they tend to be 10-year bonds. But we, in the last 2 years, have not taken on new capital improvement bonds because we really planned that so we could absorb the increase in the high school bonds a little more easily. And so you're going to see a decrease from year to year as those bonds start dropping out, along with the interest declines. So next year, we would see a savings of $184,000 in that regard. Just didn't project out 26 and 27 because there are so many of them. But there's another factor to consider in our bonding. This is more by way of a reminder. So we have a decline in expenditures in FY25. But we also mitigated the impact of the increase this year using half of the $400,000 from that amazing class in 1951. That's exactly what it was intended to do. But similar to the issue with using fund balance funds, you want to feather yourself out of that over time so you don't have a funding cliff, or a revenue cliff. So we proposed, and this was from last year, using $200,000 this year and then only using $125,000 next year and then $75,000 the year after that to move out of that. So at the end of the day, there'd still be a net increase impact on the tax rate of about $43,000, but I think we've think the school committee has done a great job mitigating that impact over time as those high school bonds have come due. There are number of items to consider. We eliminated 15 and a half teacher positions this year, but we continue to see a significant number of vacancies for teachers, for ed techs, and in assorted other positions. So right now in the budget file, and we have principals looking at this closely because we have to manually track this, we're showing just under 45 vacant positions. 20 teachers, 20 ed techs, and 4.5 other positions. So I think one of the questions, as it was last year, will be, do we retain those positions in the budget when we can't fill them? Just to make that equation a little more complicated, we also have currently 16 positions that are actually filled on our ESSER 3 federal funds. 9 teachers, 5 ed techs, a social worker, and a nurse's aide. So that's 16 positions. That grant ends in September of '24, which is great because we can at least not only use it through this year, but for next summer activities that have been very successful. But then those funding for those positions are eliminated. So the question will be, do we slot some of those staff or all of those staff into some of the vacant positions that we have? I mean, it doesn't seemingly make sense to be reducing teaching positions for existing staff when you have 20 that are already vacant, right? So that'll be part of that conversation as we look to pulling ourselves away from that. Third area for consideration is capital planning. And I noted earlier we haven't made any requests for the last 2 years, but there are some capital needs that are accruing in the district. And that's why the school committee approved entering into a contract, 2 different contracts, one with Harriman to do a long-range capital plan, and one with energy efficient investments to look at ways to reduce utility costs over time. They're working together to put together that capital plan, and that will really drive a lot of conversation around school configuration, short-term investment needs for capital, and long-term. We are talking millions of dollars at the end of the day. We're looking at full roof replacements. We're looking at completely new boiler rooms. We're looking at replacing components that are wearing out or are not energy efficient that can be replaced. So as we think about our debt service going down, it's something of a misnomer as we think about what our needs are moving forward. So December 6th, they'll be coming forward to begin to talk about some of their recommendations. I think that'll be a higher level conversation. You're not going to see a lot of specific recommendations around HVAC systems and those kinds of things, but you can anticipate you'll have to make a greater investment in your debt service over time with that. And then finally, I just wanted to note, following up from Dr. Brown's discussion on the maintenance contract of the city, it's going to look really different because custodians and maintenance staff are now city employees. And beginning next year, they're going to run all of their expenditures through their books and just bill us back as a contracted service. So where we would provide you in your budget book with a detailed budget for what's in the school department's budget, this year, for next year, it'll be a city budget for Article 9 for those accounts that pertain to school maintenance. So we'll have some of our own accounts on Article 9, debt service, property insurance, and some technology repair accounts. Article 9 is $5.7 million, so you're going to see a multi-million-dollar proposal from the city to maintain our schools for the coming year. So that'll look very different, but at the end of the day, the school committee still has the ability to determine the bottom line for what they want to see for those expenditures. So as we looked at the schedule for presentations, we're expecting they'll come forward in the same way other department or program directors do to talk about their budget recommendations, and the superintendent will weigh in on her recommendations for that budget, but it will look very different.
Thanks, Mark. So the last item is your questions and thoughts.
Anyone have any preliminary thoughts for Dr. Brown? Any questions? Well, Mark and she are both here. Clarissa?
I have a question that is going to not sound very nice, but I'm curious what sort of procedures are in place. I know Harriman is also basically who we contract for almost all of the projects, and they're also doing the consultation. So I'm just curious, what are we doing to make sure that there's not a conflict of interest there? I asked this before when I knew this is who we hired, and I know this is a legal thing,
Sure.
but this is something I think about quite a bit.
So Harriman is only contracted to produce a plan. The next part of that conversation, once you know what you want to invest in, is how do you move forward with that? Do you hire Harriman? In some cases, you may be hiring EEI. And one of the reasons we really supported bringing EEI forward is because they can work very independently with multiple competitive bids in a way that other energy efficient companies don't. Like typically you do you'd have Siemens come forward recommending a performance contract with Siemens. EEI doesn't do that. So all you're contracted for now is the plan. How you implement that plan is still up to the school committee, and that can be a conversation at that time for how you hire the engineers to move forward with whatever the recommendations are.
Any other questions for Dr. Brown or Mark? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you for that presentation. School committee student reps. Do we have a report from either one of you this evening?
Thank you, Ms. Matthews.
Yeah.
As of last year, the Student Leadership Council started Mentorship, a program geared towards strengthening our community with the end goal of making students more comfortable with each other and teachers, while also letting them know that Edward Little is a safe place for everyone and our community expands far beyond the walls of the school. Every Tuesday during Flex, freshman homerooms get together with their 2 assigned upperclassmen mentors that are SLC members. The mentors guide the students through many activities geared towards team building and community. Last year was the first year and it had its ups and downs, but this year things are going much smoother with more engagement from students. Mentorship is something we hope to continue in the following years, and we are already seeing a lot of progress with the sophomore class that started it last year.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for that. All right, superintendent's report. Dr. Brown, there's nothing listed here. Do you have anything this evening?
My report primarily dealt with the budget, so
Budget,
it has been given.
Sure, thank you. School committee chairperson's report. I just wanted to report out, Dan, you had mentioned at our last meeting with communications and being on the agenda. So having kept buckets and buckets and buckets of copious notes, I went digging through our January 22 school committee retreat where we talked about what's on the agenda, what's not on the agenda. We had decided at the January 22 that we were going to keep the agenda as the same format that we had. So this format's been used since January of 2020, actually. That we had decided communications, if they came to the school committee, would be immediately forwarded off to Dr. Brown so they can be dealt with in the appropriate way. But if the new sitting school committee, when they meet in January, wants to revisit the agenda and the agenda format, then you are certainly welcome to do that. But I just wanted to make sure you got that info on where communications went. Okay? All right, thank you. All right, city council update. Mr. Mayor?
No update.
Okay, all right. Committee reports. Finance committee, actually, Jason, do you mind if I have you just kind of touch on the minutes are there as far as the big one was the finance, and there's a lot of decisions that are going to have to be made later on in the agenda. But Jason, do you want to quickly touch upon our the minutes from our finance meeting, if you would, please?
So we had a meeting of the audit committee several weeks ago, and that's with an independent audit for fiscal year 22, because we always have 3 books open at any given time. So not our current year or even last year, but the year prior. In that came out several important things. First of all, we do, as Mark alluded to, we have a pretty substantial fund balance, and actually in excess of what the state mandates we have, which historically is 5% of your operating budget, but during COVID, they upped that to 9% due to the influx of ERSER money. We are exceeding that. So we wanted to propose what we could do with that money within the school system, because it is appropriated towards education. It can't be used to tar a road, for example. The city has the same issue as well, okay, and we're dealing with that as well in the next meeting on Monday. But with regards here is we looked at several different proposals, looked at some critical needs that we had, and they really circled around additional infrastructure at the high school to pay for things that weren't included in the initial budget, i.e. dugouts, landscaping, which is, we just don't have any budget for landscaping. So was one. Second was on technology, to make sure that we had a technology fund. And then third was something that came out of the curriculum meeting that I asked for, which was a curriculum fund. Now, these funds are all enterprise type funds, correct term? Enterprise type. On the school side, we call them?
We call them capital reserves.
Capital reserves, okay. So capital reserves funds on the school side, basically setting aside money so that we always have that money, or not we always, but for a long period of time, we have the money on hand to do what we need to do with the high school, technology updates, and especially curriculum. And those of us that are on the curriculum committee will remember that we didn't have curriculum until just recently. We want to make sure that does not fall under the axe of a future school committee, not even next school committee, but probably the committee thereafter as we start replacing curriculums. So now we have those funds set aside. That's what we did. We're presenting them to you tonight. We brought us back down to state 9%, at least for fiscal year 22. But these decisions are going to have to be made as well with fiscal year 23's audit is complete probably sometime in the summer of next year.
Great, thank you. Also, all right, so that meant thank you for finance. Subcommittee. Pam, would you mind, you attended the health and safety subcommittee. There was just like the finance committee, there was a lot of good stuff in there. And would you mind just touching upon how the school department has set up supports for our students in regards to what the incidents of a couple weeks ago?
I'd love to. The plan for returning to school was collaboratively developed with the district crisis team, guidance staff, and administrators, establishing a return date of October 30th, 2023, with a 2-hour delayed start. This delay allowed staff adequate time to process and prepare for the arrival of students. Ms. Galway is the guidance director, and the guidance team developed an agenda for principals and guidance staff to use at each school on Monday morning. The agenda included self-care tips for staff and strategies and talking points for students. Each counselor and principal customized their talking points based on the students' grade levels and developmental and social emotional needs. A comprehensive support plan was implemented for the students, with teachers receiving strategies and talking points to address students. The Auburn School Department guidance counselors, social workers provided on-site assistance with additional support that came from social workers from day one, health affiliates, and NAMI. For staff, breakfast was provided on day one, and the delayed start for students allowed for a staff meeting focusing on self-care tips, resources, and preparation for student arrival. Floating substitutes provided coverage, and counselors for staff were available through Anthem. Ms. Galway shared that there was uncertainty about what to expect, but the plan worked very well, and the designated time for teachers to process was deemed very helpful. Elementary also emphasized the importance of the time spent with staff, and that staff were well prepared with the students regarding academic requirements and were also noted as helpful. So there was definitely a lot of support provided to the students, which was very well needed in light of the tragedy from October 25th.
Okay, thank you. I think sometimes in the minutes, things get buried in the minutes, and there are just some things I think that are very important to bring to light. So thank you for sharing that, Pam. All right, moving on, we're going to go to old business. Can I entertain a motion to approve policy AUB, IJ, NDB, student computer and internet use for second reading and approval, please?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Pat's this way, Brian's this way. Any questions, comments, debate on that one? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion approved. Thank you. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve policy AUB, GCSA, employee computer and internet use for a second reading and approval. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Pam, Brian, questions, comments on that one? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion approved. Thank you. Next, I'll entertain a motion to approve policy AUB GCSA-R, employee computer and internet use rules for a second reading and approval. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Pam, thank you, Brian. Questions, comments, debate on that one?
Just want to say thank you for making all the corrections.
All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion's approved. Thank you. All right, new business. In light of tragedy a few days ago, can I entertain a motion to request a waiver of 2 instructional days for the Auburn School Department for its closure on October 26th and 27th, 2023 because of a state shelter in place? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Pam, and then Brian. Questions, comments on that one? Sure, Pat?
It means everybody who was an employee or a long-term substitute position will get paid. That's right.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you. Next is a motion to dedicate up to $500,000 in excess fund balance funds for additional needs at the new high school, including but not limited to dugouts and landscaping. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
Pam, I'll take you for a second. Brian, start off. Any questions, comments on that one? All right, Clarissa?
Since it's really opening in its wording, I was wondering if we wanted to put additional infrastructural needs or what, I just don't know what else might fall under that or what was intended.
I think when we did, that's why we did the motion this way. It has to include these things, the dugouts and the landscape, but it's not limited to that. Is that the answer? All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Yeah, motion passes. Thank you. Next is can I entertain a motion to dedicate up to $500,000 in excess fund balance funds for high school technology? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Brian. Questions, comments on that one? I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. Nice. We are not bonding that out. We'll have the funds to carry. Next is, can I entertain a motion to authorize the school committee to establish a curriculum development reserve fund for the purpose of funding curriculum development, materials, equipment, software, and professional development? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Pat, I heard you over here. Pam, Hart, I'll go this way. For a second, questions, comments on that one?
Yeah, Madam Chair,
Yep.
just as like a point of interest here, this $286,000 is not just an inactive savings account that's going to draw interest or, over the next 2 or 3 years, and then we're going to have a cost of $286 or $1,000 for curriculum. This needs to be funded. Unlike the other two, which should cover, the next immediate needs for, its stated uses, this needs to be added to every single year. This is just a jump start, if you would, and make sure we have that money there. So I just want to make sure that future school committees remember that they still have an obligation.
Any other questions or comments?
I completely agree. And I just want to commend the Finance Committee for being proactive in all of this, because it's important that we look ahead and not just where we are now. So I commend the Finance Committee for doing that.
Thank you. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, I'll call. Pat? We have to establish the account. First, we have to establish the account, and then we establish the dollar amount that we're going to put in. Yep, but first we have to establish an account happens. Okay? All right, any other questions or comments? All right, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And the last is to do exactly that, Pat. Can I entertain a motion that the school committee transfer $268,000 from excess fund balance funds to the curriculum development reserve fund for the purpose of funding curriculum development materials, equipment, software, and professional development? Do I have a motion?
So moved.
I'll go Brian this way. I happened to hear you first, and then I heard Pam Hart right after that. Any questions on that one? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you all for that. All right, upcoming meetings are listed, and I believe the date for the school committee inauguration for those of you who are continuing on has also been listed here. There is no December 14th finance sub, is there a December 14th?
No, this
finance?
agenda went before that decision was made.
Okay, so there will be no December 14th
Correct.
meeting then, okay, for
the
the finance
Finance
committee. Are there any other adjustments that we want to make on here as far as November 27th, the fundraising? Okay, that one stays. November 28th, are you meeting policy? Okay, all right, just wanted to make sure. All right, with all of that said, any other future agenda items or requests for information? Seeing none, can you hit your mic?
We're having a DEI committee on November 20th at 4? What time? 5? I can't remember. 5
Can you-
o'clock, just to go over
Okay,
what we're,
can you say that date
What it is.
again? November 20th?
November 20th at 5.
Okay,
That's going to be really short.
okay,
Okay.
all right. Thank you very much. We'll add that one on there. Anything else to add? All right.
The inauguration going to be?
Oh,
It will be in the auditorium of the new high school.
So the seats are in?
Oh, we're hoping the seats are in.
it may be a BYOC.
I kind of got a sneak peek of it this week or last week. The seats are in. They're just finishing up painting and stuff. It's beautiful.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. All right, any other future agenda items or requests for information? Seeing none, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Pam, Brian, all those in favor? We are adjourned, ladies and gentlemen. Brian, I got you 5 minutes to spare before you have to leave there, buddy. All right.